Hello, welcome to Neuron English. Today I am presenting to you the program for Fast Forward for students with dyslexia learning English. My name is Joyce Cairns and I've been working with Fast Forward for 10 years, and I've worked with over 7,000 students in that time. So let's have a look at the learning timeline for students with dyslexia learning English. The learning timeline starts with listening. This is followed by listening comprehension, followed by speech. And speech is important for communications. Good vocabulary, good pronunciation is important, but also storytelling is a very important part of speech. This is followed by reading. And there are two parts to reading: decoding and reading comprehension. So making out the words is one part, and understanding what we've just read is the second part. This is followed by writing, and finally learning. So what do we need to be able to listen and to speak and to read and to write and to learn well? Well, we need good cognitive skills. We need good memory, good attention, good processing, and good sequencing. So let's start with listening. And my man here is called Luca. And we're just going to talk about listening for a little while. When our babies are born, they're born with brains that are wired for language. And they're not born with the ability to speak, but they do listen, and they then learn to speak. So whatever language a baby is exposed to, that's the language the baby will learn. Those are the sounds within that language that the child will pick up and learn from. So by listening to mummy and daddy and all of the sounds around him, the child learns to speak his native language. A child will not learn to speak Russian if his parents speak Italian or English. And parents teach their children language in many, many ways. And one of the things we do as parents to enhance our baby's language is to teach them nursery rhymes. And something as simple as a nursery rhyme can develop all of those cognitive skills that I was talking about a little earlier: memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. We call it maps. We call them maps, I should say. So if we take this simple nursery rhyme: Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Now here, a child first of all begins to realize that there are some rhyming words, or words that sound alike, or sounds that sound alike. He begins to remember the words, sequence those words, and learn the words in order, line by line, verse by verse. The child has to pay attention. He's got to pay attention to what mummy and daddy are singing or saying to him when he's trying to make out the nursery rhyme. He's got to process the sounds, process similar sounding words and words that don't sound alike. And he's got to sequence the words in the order in which they're recited. So he remembers the words, he sequences them line by line, verse by verse. So all of those cognitive skills are developed in something as simple as a nursery rhyme. And unfortunately, nowadays, parents are not teaching children nursery rhymes like they did maybe 20 years ago. And it's an awful shame, because it's a very good way to develop these very important cognitive skills. For our older teenagers, 80% of what a student does in class is listen. So that listening skill is very, very important. And if a child has been diagnosed with dyslexia, if a psychologist has assessed him and diagnosed him with dyslexia, that psychologist has tested for memory, attention, processing and sequencing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the processing first. It's important that we work on two parts of processing: the processing speed and the processing accuracy. Students need good processing to learn the rules of our language and to associate sounds with letters. If we look here at this screen, we can see that there are two representations for the word say. So if I click on the first speaker, I hear the word say. Now, this representation here represents the S sound, and this representation here represents the A sound. And when the teacher says a word like say, I should hear say. However, if a student is listening to the teacher and he's not quite processing what she's saying as quickly as he should be processing, then there may be a gap between the S and the A. Even if that gap is 1/100th of a millisecond, he might process the word as stay or spay. Now, if this happens in class, the child, he then has misinterpreted what the teacher has said, and it might take him a little while to register that she's not talking about what he thinks she's talking about, and so he loses the train, and so he may lose concentration and therefore may not be able to get back into what the teacher has been saying, and obviously will not remember what she has said if there are gaps in what he was listening to. Also, with processing, if he's playing catch up with her, if he's trying to make out what she's saying but he's not quite getting it as he should be getting it, then he's not going to be able to remember it, he's not going to be able to concentrate, and so poor processing speed can affect the other cognitive skills. So here we also have to be able to differentiate between very similar sounding sounds. In English, for example, ba and da, or be day, bd, these sort of sounds sound very, very alike, and they're very easily mixed up, especially for students with dyslexia. So in the program, there's a lot of work on differentiating between very similar sounding sounds, but also differentiating between high, medium and low frequencies. So if we look at ba and da, now sounds are made up of frequencies, and if we look at the frequencies that make up these sounds, we see that ba is made up of two medium frequencies. Here in the blue section we can see these horizontal lines, and ba is made up of two low frequencies. These lines are pointing downwards here, as you can see. Da again is made up of two medium frequencies. There's a low frequency here, but there's high frequency here. So the only difference between these two sounds is this high frequency. And sometimes with dyslexia, a child may not be able to process that high frequency and therefore may not be able to differentiate between these sounds as far as the sound is concerned. But he sees two different representations, but he's hearing the same sound, or his brain is hearing the same sound for the two different symbols. In the program, we slow down the speed at which the sounds are said, and the sound has been acoustically modified, so it has been slowed down 4 times, so it's 4 times slower than normal speech. And we know that from research that it is easier to train the brain to process when sound has been slowed down. As the child or as the student moves through the program, the speed speeds up until it's the same speed as normal speech eventually. So in the program we have the cognitive skills, as I said, are all developed. So memory, attention, processing and sequencing are all developed in the Fast Forward Literacy program, and all of your students will be working on the literacy program to begin with. Within literacy there are 6 exercises: Space Racer, Galaxy Goal, Spin Master, Lunar Tunes, Star Picks and Stellar Stories. Now, Space Racer works on differentiating between high, medium and low frequency sweeps. This in turn helps the student to access language and language comprehension, remembering, listening better and remembering so that he comprehends better, but also being able to follow instructions, taking in every element of the instruction. So if a teacher in the classroom, for example, says, take out your English book, open page 45, read the first paragraph and answer the first 2 questions. That is a very complicated instruction if you do not have good memory, attention, processing and sequencing. So we see that following instruction improves after the children or after the students have worked on exercises such as Space Racer or Stellar Stories. Lunar Tunes, for example, is a good memory exercise, and here students match phonemic sounds or phonic words, and it builds up not only their phonemic awareness but also their working memory. Stellar Stories works on English language conventions, for example, grammar. It works on comprehension, vocabulary, very important, and story comprehension and retelling stories. So in exercises, this, for example, is a processing exercise which is very similar to Space Racer, which is the teenage version of Sky Gym. And here we can hear a high and a low frequency sweep. So the student clicks on the triangle for the high and clicks on the low for clicks on the square for the low. So whichever he heard first, he clicks on. So here he would click on the triangle because the triangle would represents high, and he would have heard high first and low second. High, low. Now that is slowed down, but this is the normal speed of speech and is much faster. High, low. Again, the graphics here are for small children. The graphics your students will be working on will be age appropriate, so please don't worry that this is babyish looking. This is for younger children, but it's just to demonstrate how the voice has been slowed down.
Touch the green circle. Touch the green circle.
So then as he progresses, the voice speeds up. Okay, so here the student is given a very simple instruction. Touch the green circle.
Touch the green circle.
But this advances, there are just 3 elements to that. Touch the green circle. But this advances to maybe 8 elements to an instruction. With the small green circle, touch the large blue square. Now the student has to remember a lot more and carry out the instruction Here in this exercise, the student works on double embedded clauses. So, for example, the boy who is smiling is pulling the girl who is frowning. So the student has to listen to many elements again, and he's given a choice of pictures to choose from, and he has to match the picture to the instruction or the sentence that he's just listened to. So the goals are to improve processing, sharpen phonological representations, enhance oral language, and to strengthen reading, writing, grammar, spelling, punctuation, and creating a successful student. By the way, it's not just when the students work on literacy, they don't just improve in English, they improve in every other subject, because you're building those cognitive skills so they can access learning no matter what they're learning. So memory, attention, processing and sequencing are our foundations to everything along the learning timeline. When the students work on the program, just literacy, fast forward to literacy, they will complete about 40,000 trials. That is an incredible amount of work. Now what happens in the brain is the neurons are firing, and those neurons begin to make new connections with each other. And when those connections are made, there is a chemical reaction in the brain. So there is a feel-good factor. The students themselves know, hey, they're getting it right, they're doing it right, and they have this feel-good factor, and they become motivated through their own success. So here we can see the connections being made from working on the program regularly and frequently. Motivation is a very important part of the program, and within each exercise there is a reward when you get the trial correct. So every time the student is responding to a stimulus, every time the student clicks the mouse, he either gets it right or wrong. If he gets it right, there's a reward. If he gets it wrong, there isn't a reward. So in this case, he's being asked to spell something correctly, and if he gets it right, he'll be rewarded by getting a squirt of ketchup or whatever in his hot dog. So the kids love these little rewards or these little surprises, but it's important too that we motivate them externally as well, that that there is some reward, there is something for the students as a reward for attending every day and working on the program as best they can. We find showing the students their reports, and teachers can access these reports online, and every week teachers should have a look at the reports and discuss the reports with the students, because the students love to see how they're doing after working so hard for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So here we're looking at a graph that shows you how well I am doing on literacy, or fast forward literacy I should say, and you can see that all my lines are going up nicely there. So I'm not struggling with anything, I don't need any intervention. But if one of my lines was to plateau, then you would have to have a closer look and see why exactly I'm struggling with the exercise and intervene and help the student overcome his problem with that particular exercise. There's a weekly achievement report, and here you can see at the end of each horizontal line there's a green section that tells you how much I've progressed in the last week. Here you can see all the points I've scored in each exercise I've worked on each day. So Sunday I worked on 2, Monday I didn't work on any exercise, Tuesday I worked on 3, Wednesday I worked on 3. So you have to work, the student must work on whatever is presented to him. So some days there are 2 exercises, some days there are 3, and the odd day there may even be 4, but whatever is presented, the student must work on those exercises. There are also error reports, and it's important that teachers check these error reports to see what mistakes the students are making so that they can help the student, and this work should be done in addition to the fast forward computer work. This work is done away from the computer, reading through the mistakes and helping the student understand why he is making the mistakes he's making. But to be a success, you must work at success, and we must set a plan. So the students, when Paula came to Cork, for example, the students worked in a computer lab for 30 minutes every day. The students had headphones. There were certain rules that they had to obey. They had to be quiet and respect their fellow students. They couldn't distract their fellow students. So having the plan is very important. Students, sorry, I should have just said there, students must work for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's very important. And this slide shows us that from developing the memory, attention, processing and sequencing, fast forward literacy develops the phonemic awareness, phonics, which are very important for the learning language, fluency, building up that speed and automaticity in language and in reading is very important, building up vocabulary, and of course comprehension. So building up all of these skills leading to comprehension, that's where we want to get to a place where children can understand what they're listening to and they can understand what they're reading and writing and learning. So we're developing, the program is developing this English language, developing reading, writing and learning, because these skills can be so difficult for students with dyslexia to learn. So my story started with Luca. So let's just discuss how Luca will have benefited from working on Fast Forward and working on the first program of Fast Forward called Literacy. Well, to listen, he needs to process what he's listening to, he needs to sequence it, he needs to remember it, and he needs to concentrate. So we can be sure that his listening skills will improve. And not only will he be listening better, but he'll be understanding what he's listening to better, having worked on the program. Reading requires decoding and comprehension, and this is very important. English is not like Italian. It's not a transparent language. It is not a very phonetic language. We start off, of course, by teaching small children or children who are just beginning to learn English. We teach them simple phonics, but it very quickly progresses onto quite complicated rules and rules that break the rules. For example, if we add an E to at, we change the A sound in at to A, and the word becomes eight. If I ask a child to spell the word way, and he can spell it 2 ways, W-A-Y or W-E-I-G-H. Now, no matter how often a student sounds out W-E-I-G-H, which is w-e-i-g-h, it'll never ever sound like way. So we have to learn these rules, and we have to, in order to access this, we have to build up the student's learning ability. We have to help him understand the code in English so that he can decode, and we have to build up that decoding speed. We have to build up that fluency so it happens automatically. So we can then focus on comprehending. And in order to comprehend, we have to remember, we have to use working memory skills. And Working memory is the memory all of you are using right now to remember what I am saying. And when I finish this presentation, you're not going to remember all of it, but you're going to remember some of it. And the bit or the bits you remember, it's your working memory that has allowed you to absorb those bits and transfer those bits to your short-term memory and your long-term memory. And when you go home tonight and you tell your friend or your partner about this presentation, you'll remember quite a bit. But next week or next month, if you meet another friend and you're telling the friend about this presentation, you're going to remember less and less. But what's important is to have good working memory so we can take in as much as possible and transfer it to our short-term memory and long-term memory so we can comprehend. The same applies to listening. That working memory is very, very important for comprehension, but the speed at which we decode is also very important for comprehension, and our fluency is very important for comprehension. So for reading, when we read a word like cat, we have to decode it, we have to process it visually, and we have to process it phonologically, and we have to process it quickly, and we have to match the word then to the picture. We have to search our memory banks for the picture that matches the word. But to do this, we want this to happen automatically, so there isn't a delay. So we want to go from reading, decoding, and reading comprehension. We want to build up the fluency, build up the decoding, and build up the comprehension. For writing, the student has to be able to process his thoughts, he has to sequence those thoughts, he has to think of the words he wants to use to express those thoughts, he has to think of how he's going to structure his sentences with a beginning, middle and an end, he has to use the correct grammar, the correct spelling, the correct punctuation. There is an awful lot going on with writing. Punctuation, for example, is very, very important. Here, for example, the bear eats, shoots and leaves, full stop. So this means the bear eats, shoots and leaves. However, if I add a little comma after the word eats, it means a completely different thing. It means the bear eats, then he shoots. You can see here in the middle picture, he's shooting, and then he leaves. He's leaving after he's done the damage. So by adding this little comma here, it makes a huge difference to the meaning of the sentence. So punctuation is very important in every language, but for children learning English, it is very important that they know the rules of the English language, not just the words, but the grammar and the punctuation and the spelling as well. So in class, many of our students are listening to the teacher, but as they're listening to the teacher, they have to also make notes and they have to write down what they're listening to. So the listening has to be automatic. Students have to be able to take it in, remember it, and then write about it as quickly as they can and tune in at the same time to what the teacher is saying from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. So Luca is my scholar. He's now worked on literacy. We would expect that everything along the learning timeline, listening, speech, reading comprehension, writing, and now learning, has all improved. By improving Luca's cognitive skills, we have helped him develop the skills that he is struggling with because of his dyslexia, but also we have helped him access the English language. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and if you've any questions, I am very happy to answer them.